I'm curious to know what the panel thinks are key differences in writing copy for B2B versus B2C. Do they write for both? And if they do, what are some of the tips and tricks they use for bouncing between the two?
So I can field this one, I guess. I do a lot of B2B, but I've written for B2C as well. At the end of the day, you're selling to people. But the difference between the two is the constraints in the buying process. So in B2B, you don't just have to convince the person reading the site, you have to also convince their boss. So you really need to understand who's the decision maker, who's the key holder, who's doing the evaluation. So for example, I was doing an audit of a site where the office manager might be the one who's doing the research on the different products and taking the demo. It's going to be the doctor that signs off on the actual platform. Well, how do you arm in B2B? How do you arm that office manager to present the best possible case to their boss? In B2C, I mean, it's not universal, but the factors are, do I want this? Does this fit me and my life? And you've got one person who's making the call and pulling out their card and making the purchase kind of free of a lot of those constraints. So by virtue of that too, the purchase cycles for some things in B2C tend to be a lot shorter and a lot simpler. So if I'm buying a pair of jeans or if I'm signing up for Scott's Cheap Flights, simple decision, impacts just me or my family. If I'm buying enterprise level software, totally different level. You're still talking to a person. You still have to convince them, entice them, talk to them like a human. But there's far more factors you have to kind of weigh in and different angles you might have to sort of weave into things. So, I think the fundamentals of things like your headline still needs to hook people and the information still needs to be easy to read and the cadence of your email still needs to make sense. Those all hold true, but it's more about understanding what does the purchase process, what does the buying cycle, what does the time in there actually look like? How much nurturing am I going to have to do for an individual versus a company? So that's kind of some of the nuances and things to think about between the two.
Shannon or Rebecca, anything to add?
No, I did a much better explanation than I could have ever given on that one.
You can kind of see how complex writing copy is. We've started talking about the pillars of like understanding your audience and then the technical side of their online behavior. But what I want to talk about, like influence, motivation, appeal, like the kind of human nature, psychology, sociology. What do you guys have gut instincts? Is it experience? Are people, once you start writing copy, they're more predictable than you first imagined? How do you approach, like, really what lever are you gonna apply?
Yeah, there's so many like classic and new psychology books around persuasion. Typically conversion copy is that, like getting them to the yes, like really convincing them versus nurturing them or giving them information. It does that too, but yeah, there's old like, is it Persuasion by Cialdini, Influence by Cialdini? I can share like a list after, but there's so many. And now too, like there's, if you just Google like persuasion triggers or tactics, or sadly it's more fear-based, like that is more motivating than the positives, but yeah, it is a bit of kind of brain hacking.
Yeah, the persuasion, I always like to show up, or clients to show up, as the trusted expert, the ones with experience in their area. You want to build that trust, you want to build that consistency. I find naturally I tend less to go try to persuade or I don't know, manipulate in any way. I try to be more direct where possible. But there are definitely like certain words that people just respond to, like free, trial, like there's certain words that just get clicked through more. So they are helpful to get people into like opening your email, right? So I'm not the expert on those types of writing, but that's how I try to show up, is that consistency, building trust, experts in your field, be knowledgeable about what you're selling.
Yeah, and not just words, like it really is the whole package with design and response to color and font and layout. Like even the best copy won't convert if it's in a shitty design.
Correct. Agreed. Yes.
Joel, where do you weigh in on the persuasion? I almost said manipulation. I meant motivation.
I think there's a really important distinction to be made. Can copywriters and copywriting be manipulative? Absolutely. I mean, that when you understand how people make decisions and when you understand playing with fear or that sort of thing, yeah, but it's not a dark art. We're not like hypnotizing people into making decisions. I think that the thing to think about, right, is we all want to believe that we have totally rational, free agency. But then think about the last time we actually could all be out in public, say a busy mall, and someone drops a loony. Every single person in that store is going to hear that loony drop, key into where it is, and it cuts through everything else. That's more what copywriting is about. It's less about manipulating people to throw loonies on the ground and more about getting them to hear the loony drop and respond to that. So in terms of things like persuasion, I think, we're going to get, people are going to get tired of hearing it from us, but you need to understand the customer. And when you can unpack what motivates that person and what's behind them wanting to make that decision, then you have a better chance of selling to them. I think people want copywriting to be this like plug and play, like, well, if I just write this length or I just use this formula. But when you think about the best salespeople, let's say people selling a minivan, like they might have a formula or a script that they start with when they start a conversation around selling a van, but the best people in the business are going to adjust to whoever they're talking to. If it's someone with a family, they're going to key into the factors like, hey, there's lots of storage space and it's really safe for your 2-month-old. If they're talking to someone who runs a delivery business, and be like, there's so much room in the back, it's ultra durable, you can chuck your tools in there, this thing's going to go forever. Like there is no mystical secret set of, even though it's true, we respond to some words and some stimulus and some things different than others. The biggest part of it is the message in line, and is it convincing, and does it sort of meet a person with the anxieties, fears, questions, concerns, desires that they have. When you understand those things, you've got the Lego blocks to build the bigger picture. When you don't, you're just shooting stuff in the dark, hoping anything will resonate with them.
Yeah, and ideally you're not like working for big tobacco or use your powers for good. Like there isn't a product or service I've written for that I didn't believe in. Like ideally you're making these people's lives better. They just have to understand how.
Yeah, when Joel was talking, I really got a sense of relatability. It's like, how are we relating to people? How are we relating to our audience? And are we giving them, the content that they need at that point to help them make a decision? It's more of a helpful device instead of persuasion or manipulation in some cases.
I think to close this off too, it's important not to lose sight of like, I could make someone's site convert at 100% by telling everyone it was totally free. That's not necessarily beneficial to the business, right? Like lying or like bringing in, claims that like undervalue the value of the business. And I saw this question kind of pop up in the chat. Like the point is not to take a word someone responds to like free or like, powerful and just like chuck that into the copy wherever. Or the idea is not like, oh, people like check marks, not bullets, so we're going to have tons of check marks. Or, okay, we need social proof, so we're going to put social proof here and there and everywhere. I think the simplest framework to think about approaching copywriting for anyone, whether you're a copywriter or you want to be one or you're trying to do this for yourself, is to imagine whatever you're about to put together as a conversation with the person on the other end, and to sit down and map out, okay, who is this person? What do they want? What are they nervous about? If I was having this conversation with them in real life, what questions would they ask and in what order based on what they already know? If you just start there, you're already closer to writing something persuasive than if you just pull tactics out of a hat because someone said, well, we increased button size 300% and conversions went up 20%. So it all comes back to the customer and the people you're trying to convince, and what will they find convincing? What would you say in a normal conversation that might help them understand the value of what's on offer here?
Yeah, well said, Joel. And there's a whole back end experience too. Like there's false advertising, you can convince people, particularly with SaaS, but if the experience behind that is shitty, the churn rates, like they're going to burn, they're not going to come back. So it's almost just the front door with different products.
Bonnie asked, she's wondering about secondary audiences that are influencers to the primary target audience. How do you think about writing for the influencers with the intention that they will influence the primary target audience? So you're not writing for the target audience, you're writing for the influencers. Do you have any tactics or strategies around that?
That's tricky because, like, if you mean paid influencers, then maybe not, but they would be the primary audience.
Yeah. So what she's I think was saying here is that, let's say you have a product like a razor for a man, like a beard trimmer or something. How are you writing for the spouse or girlfriend to compel
Okay.
decision? Yeah.
Got you. Yeah, I mean, ideally for different audiences or sub audiences, you can have different properties, like have a landing page, have a targeted ad that goes there, so you can speak specifically to that person. I hate casting a wide net and trying to talk to too many audiences at once. That never works. So the more you can kind of cut those chunks off and direct them there, the better.
I think too, finding, well, what do these audiences have in common? I mean, they might be very different in terms of some aspects, but in a situation where you have like a homepage, right? Homepages are where all of your traffic comes to play, and everyone from every awareness level, like that's where they all wind up. So, oftentimes it's about finding the commonalities. Like, let's take that razor example. What does, the guy using the razor and his partner have in common? Well, they both want him to be well-groomed and good looking. So play to that, right? I mean, one might care about the unit economics of buying a razor, and one might care more about the blades on the thing. But, we live in a world where we can personalize the messaging to the channel, to the individual. We're getting better and better, and the tech to do that's getting cheaper and cheaper. But in situations where you have to talk to both, or you don't have the ability to separate them out, find what they have in common and play to that, and then quickly give them a path to go down that will most appeal to them. So, find the commonality, push that, but then give them access to the information that individual might want.